Let's first, I want to play you this clip because I was cracking up by it. Now, Kevin McCarthy is saying goodbye. He cast his final vote. He is not going to be in Congress, in the House anymore. Unceremonious. I mean, are you surprised that this is the end? And this is how Kevin McCarthy's kind of political career is ending?
No, listen, he's very bitter. He's very angry. And he brought it on himself. And that's what happens in politics. But he did say something. I listened very carefully to what he said yesterday. He said the most important thing for a politician to do is tell the truth.
Okay, hold on. I want to play this for you because I found it completely, I found this completely disingenuous, John. It was just ridiculous. Here he is. Here's Kevin McCarthy.
Do not be fearful if you believe your philosophy brings people more freedom. Do not be fearful that you could lose your job over it. Do it anyways. I would do it all again.
I mean, I just feel like he is he's a liar in my opinion, John. Okay, in my opinion, he goes to wherever the wind will blow him, where he thinks it'll be positive for him politically, not for the country. When he went to Mar-a-Lago after January 6th and kind of coddled former President Trump, I mean, any ounce of respect I had for the guy was gone immediately. But I guess I'm just kind of surprised that all the decades that he's been in politics, that it was just so, okay, bye. Are you surprised by that?
He had one goal, and that was to become Speaker of the House of Representatives. He achieved that goal for a limited amount of time.
Briefly, yes.
And now he's going to go out and make money. That's what former speakers do. By the way, there was another former Speaker of the House who spoke out for the first time in a while, and that's Paul Ryan, who yesterday blasted Donald Trump. And that's the kind of courage the Republican Party needs. What we have from Kevin McCarthy, who, by the way, has endorsed Donald Trump for president in 2024 and indicated this morning that if he were offered a job in a Trump administration, he might take it. And that is really something to reflect upon, don't you think?
It boggles my mind. It really, really does. I'm glad that you mentioned Paul Ryan, John, because on one hand, yes, I'm glad that Paul Ryan is speaking out against Trump, and he did earlier when he left and was no longer speaker. I do feel a little bit of cowardice, though, of these Republicans who leave the party and speak out, when they could do so much more good by being in the party, voting not for certain things. I mean, does that make sense? It just seems to me like they're taking, in my opinion, the coward way out, no longer in politics, and now I'm going to speak out. Well, where were you when you could have made a difference and voted these things down, a la John McCain?
The Republican Party has no courage. And I say that as a former Republican. Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, Chris Christie, people who have had the courage to speak out, go nowhere. And that is a real tragedy for the Republican Party. The only thing we can hope, at least I hope, is that Donald Trump loses so overwhelmingly in the election of 2024 or in the courts banning him from running, that the Republican Party will wake up. Once they get out of this cult of Donald Trump, I think the Republican Party will come back to its roots. Now, let me tell you, I don't agree with the issues on the Republican Party. This whole question of women's right to choose,
right.
The question of whether a president is above the law. You can go down the list of all of the subjects with which I heartily disagree today. This is not the Republican Party of Ronald Reagan. It's not the Republican Party of Dwight Eisenhower. Frankly, it's not even the Republican Party of Richard Nixon. And that is a tragedy for the American people. The fact that the polls now indicate such great trust by Republicans in Donald Trump is profoundly disturbing. But let me just point out to you, you can be a hero one day and a villain the next. And my hope is that the Republican Party will wake up from this cult and say, boy, did we make a mistake. And that's what it will require the Republican Party to do to gain the trust of the American people. As for Kevin McCarthy, well, I'm not sorry to see him go.
Neither am I. But what about the people who have infiltrated, specifically the House? I'm thinking of Marjorie Taylor Greenes, the Lauren Boeberts, et cetera. We still have to get those people out. Those people that honestly are a la Kevin McCarthy, kind of seeking their own kind of attention, saying whatever. And then, of course, we have this Biden impeachment inquiry with Hunter Biden. And, you know, first off, Hunter Biden wanting to testify publicly. How are Republicans really selling that that's a negative thing?
Well, they're making a case that you've got to do it behind closed doors.
Why?
But, well, let me explain to you. The Republican Party has nothing to offer the American people. And the idea of impeaching Joe Biden in the House of Representatives, they may have the votes, but they won't succeed in terms of a conviction. And in fact, there is no evidence implicating Joe Biden. There are accusations. There are piles of what the Republicans call evidence. But remember, every time they have been asked to produce that evidence, they have failed. The question is, how long do you string this along? And it is a tragedy for the American people. I've been involved in the question of impeachment since Richard Nixon. But the first president to be impeached was Andrew Johnson. And I probably have the most complete material on the Johnson impeachment back in 1868. That was a political impeachment. Most impeachments are political. And in the end, a president who understands that he's broken the law should do what Richard Nixon did. Richard Nixon ultimately resigned the presidency because he was guilty. Now, here's the question, and it's a real question: the role of the Supreme Court. Will the Supreme Court rule that the president is above the law, or will they follow the precedent established in the United States versus Richard Nixon? And that is a real question. That's why I believe, and I talked about in my podcast this morning, the Supreme Court is going to be a central issue in the election of 2024, and it should be.
If you had to bet, how do you think they're going to rule?
You know, it's a very good question. If they go by precedent, Donald Trump will lose. But I would remind you, Roe v. Wade was precedent and was replaced, of course, by a decision throwing out a woman's right to choose. There's another question that's on the Supreme Court docket, and that is a question of whether you can take a pill to do away with an unwanted pregnancy. By the way, those of you who deal with colleges and universities know it is not uncommon. In fact, it is quite common for the pill to be administered to young women in college who get pregnant, who don't want to have a pregnancy go to term. Are they going to be denied that right? And I think this is very interesting because the Supreme Court are not doctors. They are interpreting law, but they are now taking a role, which I think, I hope the Supreme Court will do the right thing. But remember, a very important fact: when Donald Trump ran for president in 2016, he announced publicly that he would nominate people for the Supreme Court who would rescind Roe v. Wade. And he followed through with that pledge.
Yes, he did.
And all I can tell you is that that's why the Supreme Court is as much a question in the election of 2024 as is who we elect as president.
Yeah. Now, as far as 2024, and I know we've talked about the candidates before, but what do you think about Nikki Haley? I mean, she is a woman, although she does not see Roe v. Wade as the women's issue of our time, which boggles my mind. I don't agree with her politically. Do you think that all of these cases and all of the attention on what Trump's accused of doing is going to help Nikki Haley? How much do you think she could be the second nominee if Trump doesn't get it?
It won't help Nikki Haley. It will help the Democrats in the election of 2024. But let me point out, there was an important announcement this morning that there will be another debate among Republicans before the Iowa caucuses. And at the moment, only two people qualify: Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley, which means that the two people who would theoretically be in line were Donald Trump to be removed are going to debate head to head. Nikki, the last time that happened was May 17th, 1948, when Harold Stassen and Thomas E. Dewey debated head to head on resolve the Communist Party should be abolished in the United States. To have two leading candidates for president debate, of course, we did have sort of a debate between John F. Kennedy and Hubert Humphrey back in 1960, but let me tell you, this is going to be critical. And the simple fact is, and frankly, it disturbs me deeply, the Republican Party is now committed to Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is going to win the Iowa caucuses, if you believe the polls. He's going to win the New Hampshire primary, and he's going to win the South Carolina primary. And the simple truth is that will knock everybody out of the box. Now, remember now, you've got to watch two things. One, the caucus in Iowa and the primaries in New Hampshire and South Carolina, but also what the Supreme Court does in terms of whether or not a president is above the law. These days are highly dramatic, and frankly, novels will be written. They don't have to be novels anymore. They're factual. So I don't think Nikki Haley, frankly, will be the Republican nominee for president. I think there are too many weaknesses in her stands. And by the way, she may be a woman, but as you point out, and rightly so, she opposes a woman's right to choose. And I think that is going to be a central issue in the campaign of 2024. Yeah. American women and men like me, will never vote for a candidate who does not protect, defend, and advocate for a woman's right to control her own body. Please note, I did not say abortion. Right. Abortion, that's another issue altogether. Whether you choose to have an abortion or not should be your right as a woman. But the question of a woman controlling her own body, let me tell you something, Nikki. If they tried to tell me what to do with my body, I'd tell them to take a flying leap.
Exactly.
And that's what the American people, I hope, are going to do in November.
That's what I hope too. And I hate the polls, John. I really do. I understand that. I mean, it boggles my mind that the Republicans could not rally behind somebody else for whatever reason, whether they're scared of Trump's base or whatever. But it just, at some point, Trump will no longer be able to run, whether he gets this presidency, God forbid, or not. There has to be someone next in line. And this Republican Party is just, they're off the rails. They're completely off the rails. And I don't know how they get back.
What will happen, Nikki, is the Republican Party will do what it has done in previous years. It goes through an internal debate about what direction to go in. They did it in 1940. They did it again in 1964. They did it again in 1976. They have real contests. And then the Republican Party emerges going one way or the other. And that is what the political process should be. By the way, the Democrats are going to have the same problem. When Joe Biden is no longer the leader of the Democratic Party, whenever that day comes, there will be a battle among Democrats for leadership of that party. And that is why the dynamic of the political party is so critical. I discount, as you and I have talked in the past, third parties, because the last third-party candidate for president of the United States to be elected was Abraham Lincoln in 1860. To run as a third-party candidate is just, all it is a spoiler at this point.
Right, it's not how the game is being played. Who do you like, though, as leader? I love, and Kim and I both like Pete Buttigieg. I think he has the temperament to lead this country and unite this country. I think he has a way of speaking where he doesn't offend to make his point. Does that make sense? I like him. I know he's young. I know, he's pretty early, but I like him. I could see him being able to unite all the states, because I know people like Gavin Newsom, although, he's our governor, he's a very divisive person across the country.
So is Pete. And my wife is from Indiana. She was a big fan of Mayor Pete. But I have to tell you that if you read what the Speaker of the House, the current Speaker of the House, Mr. Johnson, is saying about the idea of a Buttigieg as a leader, he blasts him. He uses every pejorative term against a gay that one can imagine. So there are going to be a lot of divisions. And frankly, the last person to be elected president of the United States straight from the president's cabinet was Herbert Hoover. The idea of somebody from the cabinet being elected president, to me, is highly unlikely. Right. But the simple truth is the Democrats are going to have to go through a process of arguing among themselves about their future. And they have, I think, a clear advantage when it comes to certain issues, including the right of women to choose, including the Supreme Court. There are a lot of issues where the Democrats can stand out. In this election of 2024, it appears that Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee unless something remarkable happens. And it appears that Joe Biden, unless he takes himself out of the running, will be the Democratic nominee for president. Yeah. And so all I can say is in 2028, we'll have a fresh slate because neither Trump nor Biden will be eligible to run.
If we make it to 2028, John, if we make it.
That's why you shouldn't watch the movie that you watched.
Oh my God. Yeah, no, don't watch that movie. Okay, before I let you go, though, I do want to talk about what's been happening at some of the nation's most prestigious universities. I'm talking about UPenn, Harvard, MIT. UPenn's president resigned. Locally, I mean, last night was the last night of Hanukkah. And then we had that terrible thing that happened to the menorah in Oakland.
Lake Merritt, the menorah, a 300-pound Hanukkah, was pushed into Lake Merritt. Look, let me be blunt, and Kim and I have talked about this on her program. I want to be anybody who will not condemn genocide against Jews or against anybody for that matter has no business being a university president.
Yeah. It wasn't a hard thing to say. I don't know why there was so much hemming and hawing about it.
Because they don't want to offend anybody, because it's political correctness.
They're offending people by not saying it. Like, they're literally doing what they're afraid of doing. It was the easiest yes, in my opinion, to say.
You're right.
And
but
having to listen to Stefanik say it and give her points and agree with her killed me, John. But I could not believe that those presidents were having such a hard time saying it.
That's right. And all of them should have been removed from their offices. And I would say that, imagine if this were an African-American case. Yeah. What if it had been the Black Lives Matter case?
If it was women? I mean, what if it was just any other group of people?
Wouldn't stand up and condemn genocide against African-Americans. I mean, it's hypocrisy. But let me unfortunately say to you that the world expects the Jews to be the only real Christians in the world. I'm quoting now the great philosopher Eric Hoffer. And for the Jewish community, and I speak as a member of that community, as an active member of that community, the last week has been just appalling on so many levels. And separate what's going on in the Middle East right now, where you can have different points of view. But when it comes to the question of Jew hatred, there should be no ambiguity, right. no question. And so I was disappointed. And many of my friends who were involved with Harvard or with MIT or with Penn were equally disturbed. And this is not over. The two may keep their jobs at Harvard and MIT, but there are going to be ramifications. And not only Jews, but non-Jews feel the same way. Why is it so difficult to condemn genocide? Why?
I don't understand. And, there was this question of, if the president can't, condemn genocide, is the entire university anti-Semitic? And the question of money going to endowments to some of these places, they get a lot of money. We're talking about Harvard over here, UPenn.
Let me be clear. I am not in favor of economic boycotts of universities. I'm not. I worked on university campuses for 30 years, speaking on more than 150 college and university campuses in this country. And believe me, what we saw is not new. I've heard this kind of rhetoric expressed about Israel and about Jews for years and years and years. The thing that has to happen is university communities have to act themselves. They have to reform what goes on within their own ranks. And one thing that is very clear, whether you are a student or a faculty member or a member of the board of trustees, certain things cannot be permitted.
Right.
And a call for genocide against Jews or anybody should not be permitted. I do believe in freedom of speech. Let me quickly tell you that when the Nazis, as I call them, the Nazis marched in Skokie, Illinois, which was then primarily a community of Holocaust survivors, there were a lot of people who said, don't let them march. I said, no, let them march. Let them speak. I want to hear what they have to say. Because only if you expose that kind of rhetoric to the bright light and sunshine of freedom of speech can you really understand what it is you're condemning. I am a great believer in freedom of speech. I don't believe in banning books. I don't believe in banning demonstrations. Quick story. I used to take my older boy, Samuel, to political demonstrations on a regular basis. And we went to a pro-Palestinian rally where the chant from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, was expressed. And Samuel, wide-eyed and innocent, asked me, what does that mean? And I said, well, the river is the Jordan, and the Mediterranean is the sea, and everything in between is Israel. And he said, well, what they're calling for is the destruction of Israel. And I looked at him and I said, you're absolutely right. To this day, Samuel, who is now 31 years old, remembers that discussion. It is not that Palestinians don't have rights. They do, but not at the expense of Israel's right to exist. And the same thing applies the other way around. We have to be conscious of the fact that this is not a question of the Middle East. It's a question of the Middle West and indeed our own country and Europe. Did you hear now that in Denmark and in Germany, they have arrested a group of Hamas cells that are going to commit, well, planning to commit terrorist acts in Europe.
Wow.
And this is something that is an infection. You know, I described it the other day as being like shingles. Jew hatred is something that has existed for thousands of years, and it generally can be contained or controlled. But on occasion, there is a flare-up, just as it is with shingles. Unfortunately, in the case of Jew hatred, there is no vaccine.
Yeah.
There is no way to eliminate that except to expose it, to have people understand the rhetoric of it, and to really be aware that this is a serious problem. Speaking very personally as a Jew, as we had on KGO, many African Americans call me and talk about their issues long before George Floyd. I can remember when we did the discussion about African American young men and women being pulled over in their cars because they were black. We have to expose that. And one of the things that I miss, frankly, about talk radio, if we were on talk radio now, we would be talking about these. We'd be expressing our views. Now, we're doing it here on your podcast, and that's why everybody should support Nikki Madoro's program. That's why everybody should support Mark Thompson's program. That's why everybody should support Kim McAllister's program, because this is the vehicle that we use now. And if I may be so bold,
and of course yours,
around the political world with John Rothmann.
Exactly.
But it is something we all need to think about. You talked about that movie you saw. And one of the things that you learned from that movie, and I listened to your words very carefully,
Thank you,
was
John.
the one thing that survived was radio.
Yes.
And one of the tragedies of right now is that there is no talk radio in Northern California, the fourth largest market in the country, and there is no talk radio. Thank God we have this vehicle. The internet. Thank God we have the ability to express ourselves online. But Nikki, you and I know very practically that being able to turn on a radio and listen at any hour of the day or night is very different than going to this kind of a podcast. So I have an appeal to make for 2024. I want talk radio back in Northern California. I want to find a vehicle for that instrument to be used again. And
I would love it. Do you have $1 million to buy a radio station, my friend?
You know, it's a very interesting question, Nikki. Even if you had $1 million to buy a radio station, remember what it costs to run a radio station.
Oh, God.
Remember the engineers,
everything.
The Reeds, the Chris.
It is expensive. It is an expensive kind of. People don't think about it.
You've got to make money.
Yeah.
You've got to make money doing it. So it's not a charity.
No. People got to support it. Yeah, we do. I mean, it should be, in my opinion, it's a public service first, right? I mean, when there's a national emergency, which again, that movie, turn on your radios, they say. What
was the title of that movie again? Leave
the World Behind. It is frightening, John. I'm telling you, my friend, do not watch this movie.
Now, let me point something else out to all of you. The only reason I know about it is because I had the privilege of tuning in before we went on the air and heard the discussion between our own Nikki Madoro and our own Kim McAllister. And as a result, see all the things I learned. So all I can say is tune in, but more than that, support these podcasts.
Well,
Make sure you support them. It's very important.
Absolutely. And I just want to throw up Lady Beatrice, and she gave a $10 donation. So thank you. Should silence might as well be an admission of tolerance. And you would think these university presidents with their fancy doctorates would know better than to set that example. Absolutely.
Amen. Hey, is it true you're going on vacation?
I am going on vacation. Next Thursday is my last show. Kim McAllister's still figuring out what her schedule is going to be.
Excuse me, it's your last show until your return.
Until I return in the new year, yes, of 2024. I'm not going anywhere, my friend. But yeah, so I will be there, and I'm splitting my time up at KCBS, which I do enjoy as well. So at least we have that. But I do miss talk radio. I really do. I miss your programs. I miss the call-ins, but I love the community we formed. And everybody, go on your favorite podcast, whatever app you use, and make sure that you subscribe to Around the Political World with John Rothmann.